Okay, hello to the uh, recording. I'm gonna go through this checklist. The tank model is indeed in the game. Here it is. The scene is built for testing. There's ground obstacles, as you see, and I have this thing here to shoot. There is a game manager. It has all the things that it needs. Here is the singleton reference to the game manager. We have the prefabs of the player controller, and here's the spawn point. Then we have the player, and we also have a list of the players. Yes. It spawns them normally and initializes the player. I made an init method for that player that just sets the pawn as it. I didn't save a reference to the pawn because if you have the player controller, you can get the pawn. So, yeah, and it'll make sure to destroy this thing if it's a duplicate, but if not, it'll also set this as don't destroy unload. Yeah. What's next? I believe, yes, so we have tank pawn that comes from pawn. There's really not much in here. In fact, there's nothing in here because that all of the actual functionality is in the other things. Player controller is also from controller. It does have a lot of stuff in it though. Namely, I'm using input actions instead of the key bindings, but and they're not public, but that's because here we go. It uses the new input system, so it uses this instead. So technically, I mean, they are publicly accessible. All you have to do is change these bindings and click Save Asset, and it'll automatically change. Yes, the player input and player controller just showed that. Input key codes, I showed that sort of. Yeah, you should be able to access all the things with tank pawn. So what I'm actually passing is inside of the game manager. It's not. So the player controller, it gets inside of just normal controller. It's just got a pawn. So it has the tank pawn, but then it would get the just sort of gets the entire game object whenever it needs to get those components. Because if you have the player pawn script, then you can always just get that game object and then get the components on that game object. Yep, we have a separate tank mover component. It is right here. Currently doesn't inherit from anything, but that can be changed later down the line. It is a bit complicated because I had to make my own system for it. All it's doing is calculating a velocity and then moving the tank along that velocity, but it has to do a lot of things to do that. So, and when it's calculating the velocity, it's applying the damping, it's applying acceleration, it's clamping it, and then basically this is just here because it helps keep it small when it's small, because for some reason it never likes to be 0. It likes to be like a 0.0001. I'm not going to go through all of this, but these are for the inputs. Braking is a thing, and I have some just little macro things here that make the code more readable. And then down here it just applies everything. So here's it applying the dampening, here's it applying the acceleration. All it's doing for the acceleration is it's adding to the velocity the amount of acceleration that it has accrued in that time. Okay. It does use a rigid body to move. If if I go up, yes, rigid body move position. It does use transform dart rotate, I believe. Yep, to turn. Yes. Shooting is indeed performed through a separate tank shooter. Right here. I have a tank shooter for the base and then for the cannon. And so inside of the tank we have just the shooter script. And so if we open up the shooter script, it's inheriting some functionality first. So if I open this up, it does have a float for damage and for the transform for the bullet originates from, and this where it will try to shoot. And if I open this up, it just sort of builds off of that and finishes this one up. The plan is, of course, to have the other shoot components, but all of them are going to have a transform location where the bullet spawns and a damage. So the try shoot function will just see if it can fire, and if it can, then it will fire. And it uses the cooldown system, where it's just subtracting from it every frame, I believe. Yeah, it's subtracting delta time from the cooldown timer every frame, and this is the cooldown. This is the cooldown timer. So this is public. This is private. It's all very simple. Yeah. Yeah, I'll show that off. Yes. It does. So if we go to the shell, this prefab, it has the shell script on it, which has the owner. But since this hasn't been instantiated by anything, it has none. Whenever you instantiate it, you need to give it something as well. Health component does exist right here. Very simple. We have it on a tank. It's just giving a max health and a spawn health. There's a current health, but it's setting itself to the spawn health instead of the current health. But if the current health is 0, then it will just be max health when you spawn. And we do have your current health right here. It's the simplest. It has the instigator, which I could change this to source. It would probably be better if I change this to source. It's not being used for anything yet, but it will be eventually if we want to have like other things. It's just very simple, very simple. Yeah. What's next? On die, let me show that. Yeah. So when it checks death like that, and if it is dead, then it'll destroy the object, and it'll clamp as well. Right here. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so I guess I'm not. I should be using this down here as well. There we go. Yeah, if we open up the shell, we can see it has that on trigger collider event where it will make that other's health component take damage, and so that'll be the owner of this that you pass into it when you create this shell, and it will have a damage that it is also initialized with. Yes. Very simple. I have it set so that when it starts, it invokes the end projectile method after the duration time given to it. Okay, alright, now I can finally show this off. So, as you see, I accelerate forward and I hit the wall, and it doesn't go through, which is all good. Quickly, just to go over some of the things that my tank has on it. So, you put in the top speed of the tank first, and then you tell it how fast it is able to turn when it's not moving. Additionally, down here, it uses an animation curve to change how fast you can turn based on the velocity. So velocity is X value. So as you speed up, you start to turn slower. I'm going to make this a bit more extreme, actually. Yeah. I'm also going to do this, because this is, I think, having a little bit of a bend there. This would make it nicer. And then you basically pass in the amount of time you want it to take for it to accelerate to top speed. So in this, it's 2. Then you pass in the dampening time, which is roughly how many seconds before this thing will stop by itself. So this is like friction. Then the angular damping modifier basically is extra dampening if your tank is moving at a 90-degree angle. So like if you're just moving left somehow on the tank because you turned, it will apply extra dampening. And then the dampening scalar for braking is basically it'll triple the dampening when I hold down the brake button. And that's it. There's also this dampening curve, which, if you think about how friction works, you have more friction the faster you're going. So you're gonna have extra dampening if you're going faster. This is all just to simulate a good feel for it. So if I go now, the way the controller works, you have access to acceleration. So when I press forward, I'm just accelerating it forward. I'm not changing the velocity directly, so it's like a buffer. And I can turn, and everything's good. In fact, I can even have my controller, and I can move forward just a little bit, because I'm using that controller, like axial input. So I can put really small values in like this. And the best part is I can actually drift. So wow. And it works really, really well. Yeah. And I can also brake. So if I go up to top speed and I hold down left trigger, it'll brake really fast. And once again, just to show it off, let me go up to top speed. If I'm at top speed, it can take a really long time to turn. But if I stop, I can turn very fast. Now, I can shoot. If I shoot this wall, nothing will happen because the wall doesn't have a health component. But if I shoot this, it'll die. So that's it. The tank does have a health component, but nothing's here to shoot at it right now. So it can just sort of play around and do cool maneuvers, like it can go to top speed, and it can turn around and then go backwards. Alright, goodbye.